In this VDMX tutorial, we'll be going over 10 of our favorite workflow tips. A few of these tips may have been mentioned in previous tutorials, but we thought it would be helpful to consolidate them for easy viewing. We'll be using a 2-layer setup for these examples. We have 2 preview windows set up for each layer, and our main output on the far right. In this first tip, we'll show you some keyboard shortcuts that'll help improve your workflow and save you some time. To quickly adjust the range of your parameters or sliders, Option and click to set the minimum value of the range. Command and click on your slider to set the maximum value of the range. Now when you adjust the values of this layer opacity slider, you'll notice that your parameters are limited to this range. This is a good way to dial in on your effect or behavior of certain parameters. You can also click and drag the points on the slider to adjust your range. Last but not least, you can fine-tune your range by entering the exact value in the UI inspector. Lock your sliders to avoid accidental adjustments by right-clicking and choosing Lock and Unlock Slider. To put focus on any interface item in the inspector, Shift-click. And this works on everything from sliders to buttons and even drop-down menus. Right-clicking on your interface works as well. If your windows are snapped, all adjacent windows can be moved by option and dragging those windows, which keeps them locked in place. And lastly, under the window menu, you can lock your windows so that you don't accidentally move them. A quick way to automate an effect to BPM is by using the clock plugin. Choose the effect you'd like to automate. In this case, we'll use Pixelate. Right-click on your chosen parameter. We'll go with Cell Size. Select Use Data Source, Clock, and Measure Position. If you look at your clock window, the clock indicator moves at the same speed as the range of the cell size parameter. You can adjust the range to whatever works best for you visually. In this example, I'll make the range really small, since I don't want the pixelation to get too big. You can also double or half the BPM easily by using these buttons right here. This is a convenient way to speed up or slow down your parameters while keeping them in sync with BPM. If you're using tap to BPM, make sure to reset the clock on the first beat of audio. This will keep your parameters in sync with the music or audio. If you use multiple media bins and want to switch between the pages of your media quickly, you can set keyboard or MIDI shortcuts to do so. Shift-click on the pop-up button in the media bin of Layer 1. In the UI inspector, click on the Nav button. Let's set a keyboard shortcut to trigger the move down action. Click Detect and press a key on your keyboard or button on your MIDI device. I'll be using the 1 key. Now you can toggle quickly between pages in your chosen media bin. This only moves down between pages, so you can also set a shortcut for the move up action. Again, click on Detect, and if you hold the Shift key and click on 1, you can now use Shift as a modifier key to toggle upwards between pages. And this method works on any pop-up or drop-down style menu in VDMX. In this tip, we'll be creating presets to recall the state of parameters or effects. Let's enable the Pixelate effect. Currently, we have the cell size of the Pixelate parameter automated to BPM. Let's say we wanted to easily reset this so we can have manual control over the slider. To do this, shift-click on the slider to view the UI inspector. Under the Presets tab, click plus to set its current state, which is BPM automation. And let's rename this to BPM. Now let's stop the automation by right-clicking on the slider and choosing Disable All Data Sources. As you can see, we now have manual control over the slider. So if we go back to the UI inspector, click on plus again, and we'll rename the preset to manual. And that's all there is to it. Our presets can now be accessed easily on the effect by clicking on the preset name right next to the slider. If you download third-party plugins, themes, or add-ons for VDMX, there's an easy way to access the folders to place these files. Click on the VDMX menu and in Preferences, go to User Paths. There you'll see the VDMX Resources path. Simply click on Show in Finder, and all the important paths are displayed. This is where you can install additional effects, blend modes, themes, Quartz Composer sources, and more. After you've copied your files to one of these folders, don't forget to click on Refresh All Lists of Resources, and this will ensure that everything you've installed shows up in VDMX. Speaking of which, you can download our color theme on DocOptic.com, along with some awesome plugins by the VDMX community. In this tip, we'll be discussing how to remove backgrounds from your footage. If your visuals have a dark or black background you'd like to remove, the alpha mask effect is a simple way to do that. First, let's load up some visuals. Let's change the blend modes to either OpenGL over or VV source atop, which preserves alpha channels. So off the bat, our background visual from layer 2 is nowhere to be seen in our main output. On our topmost layer, let's add the alpha mask effect by going to Color Effect, Alpha Mask. By adjusting the contrast and offset, you can get really good results. However, keep in mind that visuals with dark or contrasting colors will not be visible. I tend to keep the offset pretty high and just adjust the contrast until it looks right. So this is looking pretty good. Now I can swap backgrounds and you'll notice that layer 1 actually pops pretty nicely on top. Your results will vary depending on the colors of your visual, but for the most part it looks pretty good. So let's add the city lights effect now, and you'll notice that it produces a black background. In most cases, you'll want to position the alpha mask effect at the end of your effect stack, since other effects will generate a background, such as the city lights effect. An easy way to have access to your most commonly used effects parameters is to use the Control Surface plugin. The hue parameter inside of color controls is one I use frequently. Let's create a control surface to easily tweak the colors of our layers. In the Workspace Inspector, click on the Plugins button and let's add a control surface. And we'll rename it to Color Hue. Go ahead and drag and resize the window. Next, we'll add 2 sliders, one for each layer, and you do this by clicking on the plus button. And let's rename them Layer 1 Hue and Layer 2 Hue. Now let's link the hue parameter from our color controls to the control surface. Right-click on the hue. Now go to Use Data Source and Color Hue, and choose Layer 1 Hue. And we'll do the same thing with Layer 2, but instead we'll choose Layer 2 Hue. So now you have easy access to the hue of your layers without having to scroll through the effects stack. There are times when you might want to change the default settings of your media prior to triggering. In your Workspace Inspector, click on the Files button and select your media. I'll be choosing our spectralizer visual. And let's say you wanted to have the playback rate at 2 times every time you triggered this loop. Under Source in the File Inspector, click on Rate and change it to 2. You can do this manually in the UI Inspector as well. Click on Apply in the File Inspector to save your settings. Now let's trigger the loop from our media bin. Notice that the rate is set to 2 when triggering this loop. Let's say that you adjust the rate during a live performance. So let's go ahead and change the rate to something other than 2. Let's go ahead and eject this clip. Now let's trigger it again. Notice that the rate is now set to the value we had before ejecting it. And it's because of this setting in the File Inspector. Remember, attribute changes made on layers. If this is the behavior you want, then leave this checked. If you want your media to revert to the rate of 2 every time it's triggered, then just uncheck this and click apply. Now let's adjust the rate of this clip and eject it. Now when I re-trigger this clip, the rate is set back to 2. And this is the behavior you can expect after saving the settings in the file inspector. This works with any of these media settings here in the file inspector. Just make sure to click apply. To trigger different playback positions in your media, shortcuts can be assigned to marks that act as cue points. Let's bring down the opacity of layer 1 and trigger a clip. This visual from our polyphonic set has multiple edits, perfect for setting up marks. First, let's pause the playback. Now let's scrub through the timeline and set marks on logical edit points. Let's first set one at the beginning. In the UI inspector, make sure that the marks button is highlighted and click the plus button to set a mark. We'll do this for each edit. And this is the reason why we have the layer opacity set to 0, so that we can set these marks without them showing in the main output. So let's go ahead and finish setting these marks on this layer. And once your marks are set, we can create keyboard or MIDI shortcuts by clicking on Detect. These marks are now set to the A, S, D, and F keys. Let's go ahead and hit play on our layer source window. And let's fade the opacity back up to 100%. Now by pressing any combination of the A, S, D, and F keys, we can trigger these easily with our keyboard. This is a fun way to improvise during your live performances. And to easily move your marks, you can uncheck Lock Marks in the UI inspector and move them manually. One of the cool features of VDMX is using other application windows as source media. First, let's enable this by going into the Workspace Inspector and click on the VidIn button. Under Input Type, choose Windows and Other Applications and click on Enable. In this example, I'll click on Safari, which has one of our YouTube videos loaded already. As you can see, this video from our YouTube channel is loaded. So let's go ahead and enable Safari. Right-click on any empty slot in your media bin and add clips from built-in sources. Next, you'll choose Window Inputs and choose your browser. You'll have to manually crop the window depending on what you want displayed. We already set up our cropping beforehand, and you can input values directly in here. And once you've got everything set up, you can go ahead and play back the video in your browser. And that's all there is to it. And the great thing about this feature is you can use any of your existing apps as window inputs. And this opens up a lot of possibilities as to what you can display for your visuals. We hope these 10 VDMX tips were helpful and they help improve your workflow. Thanks for watching, and be sure to visit DocOptic.com for more tutorials, visuals, and downloads for VDMX. Stay tuned for more in the future, and thanks for watching.